and thanks to all of you for coming. So I'm, by training, I'm a requirements engineer. That's a very specific kind of computer scientist, and that will be very evident in my talk, although it will be very interdisciplinary. The title of my talk, which has been user tested at CITP, is Pet Sematary, Privacy's Return from the Dead and the Rise of Privacy Engineering. Privacy has been a popular topic at least since the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. The rise of computers was very big for it in the US, later spread. But about the same time, people also started talking about the death of privacy. This was a media matter, but also, like this is from last year, academics have actually followed suit and said, yes, maybe we have reached the end of privacy. But then, if you've been following, for example, today, WhatsApp just turned on encryption, which for the sake of the privacy of their users, it seems that privacy keeps on coming back. So as much as we want to kill it, it's more like a zombie. In that sense, if you don't get the pun, I'll let you know. PET stands for privacy enhancing technologies. So we seem to be having these zombie creatures that keep on coming back and asking for our attention. And what this means right now, if companies like WhatsApp, which is owned by Facebook, but also others like Microsoft and Google are talking about privacy, which means that they're actually going to be engaging what might be called or considered privacy engineering. But it turns out this is not a trivial task. Not only is privacy itself as a concept elusive, what it means to engineer privacy is very complicated. And today I will walk you through some definitions that we have been considering with some colleagues. So what does it mean to get privacy engineering right? So we can say there are two elements that we can work with. The first one is a lot of privacy research coming out of computer science, but also neighboring fields who have collaborated with computer scientists or who have studied technologies. This research has been around for, as I said, like since the end of the 60s when some congressmen So that's kind of where that starts. But at the same time, we have another element of making privacy engineering happen. By privacy engineering, I mean basically addressing or capturing and addressing privacy issues in information systems, which is software engineering, which is what I want to bring into to the table today. So we have spoken a lot in policy circles, but also within computer science, about how privacy research can contribute to software engineers' methods, techniques, and tools that they can use in developing either privacy tools or enhancing information systems with respect to privacy. But rarely do we talk about the opposite. How do software engineers develop software, and what kind of impact does it have on the kind of privacy technologies we're proposing that they build? Is there something about the material conditions of how software is made that would have an effect on what kind of privacy technologies would be feasible? But this brings us to the elephant in the room. Ta-da. So software engineering is a bit of a, I don't want to use the term stepchild because that's kind of wrong, but let's say it's a little bit the thing that, for example, students don't need to know before they come. That's what most degrees will say, but they kind of have to learn on their own. And mostly when they graduate, they notice they didn't learn it during education. They go to a company and find out that there's actually like a whole world of software engineering that they were not exposed to. And software engineering as a research field is also kind of treated as that thing that is kind of like vanilla science, right? Like it doesn't get the kind of respect that many other more abstract and mathematical aspects of computer science gets. All right, so but let's say we should maybe pause and rethink that assumption and maybe give software engineering a little bit of a spotlight for a moment. So could it be that the practice around the production of software are an important part of privacy research? Okay, so that's the question that I want to ask. In other words, I want to know if how the sausage gets made matters for privacy research. Okay, so can we like make a circle saying research informs practice and practice informs research? And specifically, since software engineering is this huge thing, I want to focus on what I want to call the Agile Turn, right? So what has happened over the last 20 years is a grand shift in how software gets produced. There are many aspects of this, anywhere from how hardware has changed and the cost of computing, but there are two things that I want to talk about or focus on. The first one is what I will call the shift from shrink-wrap software to services. This has been promised as this has been developed as the thing that will give businesses agility. They'll be more agile. They'll be more productive with their software and more quick to respond to market needs. The second one, which is very much entangled with this first one, is the shift from the waterfall model to agile programming. And you don't yet need to know what those things are. I will explain them to you. But it basically changes the way teams work together in order to build software. So the question I want to ask throughout this talk, and I'm going to bounce around, and it will be confusing, and if it's too confusing, you should stop me and I'll explain, is this. What is the impact of the turn to agile, so the shift from shrink wrap to services and from waterfall to agile development in software engineering practice on computer science research in privacy? Okay, so let me just step you through that. That means that I first need to tell you what is kind of computer science research on privacy. I'll try to give you an overview of that. Then I will talk about this shift that's happening, the agile turn in software engineering. And then when we have time, and I hope we will, I'll talk about like some very precursory ideas of how I think this might be impacting privacy research. Okay, so let's do part one. So this is based on a long research that I did. Basically, it's a systematization of knowledge. So what kind of privacy research are we doing within computer science? I did extensive literature reviews. I went to all sorts of privacy conferences, and I also did 42 interviews with computer scientists. And I call them paradigms because they're assumptions about what the privacy problem is, what the methods and techniques are that should address this privacy problem, and what the solutions are absolutely different. They might even contest each other's definition of privacy and what counts as a good solution. So let's step through these. The first one is one that should be kind of known to most of you in the room. It basically assumes that there's a binary understanding of if I disclose information, then I'm somehow already losing some of my privacy, and if I keep it confidential in one way or another, then I have my privacy intact. This is where also most of the privacy-enhancing technologies are in terms of research artifacts. The researchers that I interviewed in this paradigm, I would say most closely relate to the right to be let alone as a kind of definition of privacy, in the sense that if there are new technologies, they do not intrude upon my privacy, and one way I can do that is to design those technologies not to do that. Another aspect that's really important for these researchers is that data is minimized, that is collected in the hands of central entities, and that if there is a technology that is being produced, it has certain mathematical guarantees. So anonymity, unlinkability, or confidentiality have to have certain properties that not only are engineered, but also have mathematical proofs. Another important element, kind of guiding principle of these technologies, is to avoid single points of failure. So you do not want to trust one entity, in this case, for example, Apple, to protect your privacy. What you want is to distribute the trust in the sense that you put in the hands of others, so that they all have to collaborate or collude, in other words, to actually break or violate your privacy. Also, another important element, guiding element, is that the code is open source. So if you saw today that WhatsApp is introducing encryption, one of the first things people said is, can we see the code? And that kind of shows you that this is an important guiding principle. So what are typical tools or technologies coming out of this kind of research? Secure messaging, so what's going on with WhatsApp right now, that basically provides the confidentiality of your communications, or Tor, which gives you anonymous communications. And here, a little overview. This is from the EFF. They give a kind of scoring card, I think it's called, of all the secure messaging that is out there. And what's kind of nice to see is these different principles actually reflected in is it encrypted in transit is very different from, is the code open to review, and has there been recent code audit, which talks to the last element in the principles. Okay, so that's the first paradigm of research. The second paradigm, that's called privacy as control, has a very different social assumption. It says, in this world, you cannot survive by not disclosing information. So partaking in social activities in this networked world, you have to show that you're part of the network. So what technology needs to do is give you some sort of control over who gets that information, and some sort of transparency, what they do with that information, and some sort of accountability that they've actually done what they're saying. This is very much in line with data protection Is this kind of working for you? Yes? Okay. This is very much in line with data protection and Weston's definition of privacy as the right to decide when you disclose information and to whom. And it also works in concert, right? Like if an organization is actually being true to their privacy policies is something that FTC can go after and check to see if they've done it or not. So it works in concert with legal compliance or legal measures, and it tries to, instead of saying we should not disclose bits, it says organizations will collect data, but they should be transparent about it and accountable to what they promise. Another interesting element of privacy as control is that it gives individuals a possibility to participate and control those information flows. So you can go to an organization, depending on the legal, that it's legally made available and the company has made it available. You can go to a company and say, what kind of information do you have about me, and correct it. And if the retention period is over, you can ask them to delete that information. So then it is not surprising that some of the technologies coming out of this paradigm are privacy policy languages. So it's about either users expressing their policy preferences, so what kind of information do I want to disclose, or companies saying here's the kind of information we will collect and share with third parties and process, et cetera. And another one is for organizations themselves, once they've collected the data, to make sure that they only use it for the purpose that they collected the information for. So like people have been working on making it possible to control that information is only used for the selected purpose. There's a lot of work also in making transparency workable, functionable. So I assume many of you have read privacy policies, or that you have struggled reading them. And this is, for example, one of the works that tries to think about how we can make privacy policies more transparent or readable to the end users. So here they're using the food label model to show what a privacy policy gives you so that you can make an informed choice about the system that you're using. The third paradigm is a little unintuitive, and let's call it privacy as practice. And it looks at privacy issues that may arise in social settings as a result of the introduction of technologies. So I always struggle with examples here. But let's say the fact that there's a microphone here, if I forgot that Jean has her earphones and can hear me, and I wanted to tell Helen a secret, it just leaked, right? And that could be somewhat socially awkward. Maybe I was saying something about Jean, like Jean looks really hot with those earphones, right? But maybe I don't want to say it in public, and now she's heard it, and something has happened. Like we have actually violated a kind of understood privacy boundary that I don't talk about Jean in third person, whatever. So all of these things, right? So basically, the introduction of new technologies can disrupt boundaries that we have, assumptions about how information is going to flow or what is going to be known. And the question is whether we can develop technologies that allow users to renegotiate that boundary. So it's a very social concern. And I'll give examples so that it kind of makes sense. So researchers in this field try to improve the user agency in negotiating privacy by making the systems kind of understandable or easy to kind of expect what the results will be of using that system for the user. They assume that privacy is integral to collective information practices and social norms. So what it's okay for me to lean over and tell Helen or to say publicly is very much informed by social norms. And they try to make sure that information systems respect these. A different line says, actually, we need to aid the users in better privacy decision making. So privacy decisions are not made momentarily, but they depend on decisions you made in the past and expectations of what you think will happen in the future. So if we could give users a sense of what happened with their information in the past, they will make better decisions in the future. So it's a very kind of almost like rational idea of the user making good decisions and how we can aid them. Another element, and if you see the difference here between this and the control was about individual control. Here we're talking about collective practices. And there's another kind of strand of research that, for example, Solon is working on, is to look at how these information systems are impacting us not just individually, but as groups of people or communities. Like, is there discrimination? Is the system handling me fair? And how can I make that transparent to the world is kind of also within this paradigm. Yes?
Is there a common link here, or is it more miscellaneous spin?
There is a common link in that it does not, none of these guys assume that there's a binary understanding of privacy in the sense of if you disclose information, privacy is lost. Rather, it's contextual. And within that context, you give certain tools. And their approaches, I think, are all trying to provide feedback and awareness in design, and also these are kind of, I think this is the general principle as well, to give feedback and awareness so that you can make informed decisions about either system design or system use in the future. And I understand that there are many, many elements coming together there, and maybe one should think about other paradigms as well. Okay, so here are some examples. So one of the papers that came out of this research said, instead of having a separate page where you do privacy controls, we should have them contextual. So when you're making a certain kind of information decision, then the control should be right there for you. It should not be removed. This one kind of reminds you of shortly reflecting on your social norms. And this one gives you a moment to decide whether you're going to disclose something, whether it's appropriate. There was actually another study where they did sentiment analysis. So they said, oh, your post sounds kind of angry. Are you sure you want to post that? And users rejected that outright as actually violating their privacy. So that was kind of a privacy tool that, ate itself up. And here, a short picture from Ward's Hart's article showing that this is the more, example of discrimination of fairness, trying to make basically how machine learning is potentially affecting different communities transparent so that we can have a social discussion about what would be appropriate in information systems. Okay. So I hope I have convinced you that these three paradigms are absolutely different. Not only because, here you have a binary understanding of if you disclose bits and privacy is gone, and here it's no, it's all social, right? I can tell you, please leave me alone. I have disclosed many bits by saying that, but it actually maybe helps me preserve my privacy, right? So they're very different. And the trust models can be very different as well. Here, for example, the service provider can be seen as an adversary, whereas here it's kind of like the holder of the mechanisms that will provide transparency and accountability. So it's a very different trust model. Okay. So one could say this is great because now we can tell the world, of people who are, developing systems that they have these different options that they can bring to bear on their software products. So what computer science has provided is diversity in problems that they've addressed in privacy and a diversity of solutions that can be implemented. But there are some things that we have not paid attention to, and I hope that privacy engineering as a field can address these. The first one is the integration of these different paradigms. And you could say, well, they're so different, does it make sense to integrate them? But let me give you an example. So let's say I'm doing a privacy as practice thing, and I want to know if, how I will design picture tagging. So I'm going to upload a picture into a social network, and I want to tag Arvind. So should Arvind be informed that I tagged him, and should the picture go up with his tag or without? Or should it only be uploaded once he has confirmed, yes, this is okay, right? There are many questions in there, and you can study and find out what would be an appropriate social norm for the given community, right? But if you just focus on that, maybe you make it very comfortable for people to disclose more information and more photographs and tag them in the social network without thinking of its implications in terms of information asymmetry and the power that can be accumulated by the service provider and maybe the governments that approach that service provider to say, give me all the photos that are tagged, right? If you don't address those questions and risks, then just addressing one of them might actually provide you with a weakness. Even though you've socially solved things, organizationally you may have increased the risks. So we haven't looked enough at integration across the paradigms, but what we also haven't done is to think about how we can systematize the way we do privacy, the way we develop technologies. How can I make sure that I can explain to somebody, here's how you develop a pet. Here are the steps you take, or here's some tools that you can use so that you don't have to be part of that small, close community to be able to develop your own privacy technologies. The other thing we haven't done enough of is to introduce some of the methods and techniques that we used into the toolkit of software engineers. Can they also do this? How do we make it available to them? So privacy engineering tries to address this initial gap that we know how to do some things in privacy research, but we haven't thought about how to make it somehow easy to implement for software engineers. We didn't think about that. So it addresses, basically, it's the field of research and practice that designs, implements, adapts, and evaluates theories, so theories of privacy, methods, techniques, and tools to systematically capture and address privacy issues when developing socio-technical systems. Now, that's a lot of words, so let me just This is the breakdown, right? So the idea is that there are privacy theories, there are normative theories of how privacy should be addressed. As you saw when I was describing the paradigms, there were definitions of privacy that people took, and these are rather interesting, but sometimes way too simplistic. But the idea is that normally you would want to start with, here is the privacy theory I'm adhering to. So if it's, let's say, contextual integrity, then I have an idea about what it is that I want to achieve, which is different from if I say privacy is control, right? It's a very different set of problems that are going to arise, and I'm going to apply my methods, techniques, and tools to that theory. And by methods, I mean all the steps that you need to take throughout the development. Techniques are things that can help you do a specific activity, and tools are automated tools for software engineers to finish a certain activity. And at the end of the talk, if we have time, I will give you some examples of those. And by socio-technical systems, I'm referring to three things. So sometimes you want to develop standalone privacy technologies, like Tor. Sometimes you want to enhance the privacy in an existing information system or a larger kind of information system, like a hospital information management system. And sometimes you want to understand what kind of privacy violations are happening in the ecosystem. So just focusing on the organization or on a single app is not going to give you that information. So you want to do some research there, and I would put, for example, what Arvind and colleagues are doing with respect to web privacy research under this category. So methods, techniques, and tools to do all three is basically the subject of privacy engineering. Okay, pause. I told you about one side, right? All of this is stuff coming from privacy research that I said should go to software engineering. Should there be something coming from software engineering to research? And here is the second part of the study, and this is rather exploratory, and I'm just in the process of digesting this, so we'll have discussions about how to continue with this research. So this is basically based on a number of interviews, 8 of them with people who are currently part of software engineering companies somewhere. They might be devs, DevOps, product managers, A/B testers, people who do AI or data products, or data engineers. I also did 4 interviews together with Hadi, where we talked with people who are actually developing privacy technologies. This is not totally part of my talk today. I also did literature review. So I looked at all sorts of texts. Like, there are lots of manifestos. There's the Agile manifesto. There's a Cloud manifesto. There's a SOA manifesto. And tried to understand what is going on with this big shift in industry. The people I spoke to were from startups as well as large companies, and we focused only on software facing the customers and not necessarily on business-to-business software development. So I basically tried to understand how this shift is affecting software engineering, right? And to give you an idea of the shift, let's start with this. All right, who knows what this is? Tell me. Okay, but what is going on here? Why are they so happy? It's not about like whether, whatever, programmers can dance or something. What is going on here? What's with this video?
Big software release.
Say it again. Big software release. Which one? Say it again.
Is it an improv?
Improv. All right. Any more guesses? Which one? Windows 10. Oh my God, do they look like Windows 10 still? Let's try that video again. This is an amazing accident. What is it? 3.1. Which one? Vista. It's Windows 95, guys. Okay. Okay, so releasing software was a big thing. They lit up the Empire State Building. Windows 95 is here, right? And shrink wrap software. Why is it called shrink wrap? Anyone? It's on a shelf, and it's shrink wrapped, exactly. So, but what we have now is like a complete change since that happened. We have, on the one hand, service-oriented architectures, and I'll talk about these things to some extent, agile methods coming in, and the cloud. I'm not going to talk about the cloud. That's even more complicated. But basically, there's a huge shift to services, and it's kind of funny because it's actually the pendulum going back and forth, because first you have mainframes, and at some point you have time sharing, which is also services, and then personal computers come, so we have no more services and just some web stuff. And now we're going right back to services. Okay. So what do I mean by that? So think of this as a continuum. right? On the left-hand side, you have shrink-wrap software, which means you have binary that runs solely on the client side. That means you have a lot of headache of matching your software to the hardware that it's going to run on. You have serious problems with updates. Actually, most people are not updating. Maintenance is really cumbersome. Users have control, oh no, and, and you pay in advance. You buy the box, and you pay, and you're done. And you go and run with your software. Classic example, Microsoft Word, right? On the other side, we have services where you're moving from, things running on your own device to a server-thin client model, which means that the data is actually managed and secured by the service. The updates and maintenance is all on your side. If you're running the service, you have the server and you can do updates as you wish. Anybody who basically connects to your server has an updated version to use. It allows for collaborative applications. And most importantly, you pay as you use. And either you're paying money or you're paying with your data. So a classic example would be Office 365 from Microsoft or Google Docs, so that I'm fair to both companies. All right, so basically what is happening here is with the rise of services, not only do we have hardware kind of dissolving into infrastructure, we do no longer see the hardware that's providing us with our services, but software is basically becoming a cascade of services. Okay, so software kind of disappears as well. Okay, so that's one change, right? There were two changes, shrink wrap to services. And the other one is the waterfall to extreme programming. When I got trained, spiral models were kind of like cool, and we were kind of looking at participatory design, and this was kind of happening when I was getting trained. And now it's full on. What do I mean? Who knows the waterfall model? Hey, excellent. Where does it come from? Why the waterfall model?
Oh, we mean just, well, because you do one thing and you completely freeze it and you're all done.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
Then you stop.
Right.
Then you go to the next thing and you do that start to finish and you're done.
Right.
And so far down this.
Where did this come from? Why did we start with this?
Traditionally,
What?
didn't it come from other fields of engineering?
Like which one?
Civil engineering?
Maybe.
Did it come from
Military.
well, it's, yeah, I mean, I worked in the defense industry.
I'm sure the military love this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So waterfall model.
Schwarzlander?
So a couple of things are happening. First of all, hardware and software are much closer at the very beginning, right? So basically, what is hardware? You do like this. Hardware needs a waterfall model. You need to have a specification, and once it gets out, it needs to be correct, right? And so hardware and software are really entangled. And basically, you think about what you really need. You then design it, you implement it, you verify, and then there's maintenance. It's really step by step. You don't go back. You don't do prototyping. You don't talk with the users or what have you. You talk with the users at the very beginning when they give you the requirements and at the very end. Okay. It turns out this leads to a disaster. I mean, this is supposed to solve what's called a software crisis. NATO gets together. We have a software crisis. But, it doesn't solve it. Basically, let's see the numbers. At that moment, I think in the 80s, 60% of the projects that are done with waterfall models succeed. 50% are contested or over time or over cost, and the rest are outright failures, right? And the other thing is with legacy code. So software, neither is it like easy to meet the needs of the customers, but there's a lot of cost. And 60% of that cost is maintenance of software. And of that, 60% is adding functionality. So the idea that you can actually get to your code all the time is really valuable because that's where your costs are. So in that sense, it's not so surprising that both the waterfall model and the services kind of go into keeping the software under the control of the developers so that they can do this maintenance at lower cost. This is seen as a bottom-up thing. Software developers basically say, we need to think about not just documents and processes and tools like in the waterfall model, but we need to think about individuals and interactions, working software, like forget all the contract negotiation and promises. You need to do customer collaboration and respond to change. And people then go even further and say, no, we need to really move away from all of this and go extreme. We need to make software in very, very short iterations. We need to make sure that it's very simple, so not complex functionality. And we need to test it all the time. We can't just wait till a year down the line to test the software. And we need to do code reviews. At this point, you're like, okay, what's up with all the marketing fluff, right? I'm giving you. But I want to like think carefully about what are the implications of the shift to services for what is happening to software engineering practice. First of all, the server thin client model that we moved to, right? Like instead of having Microsoft Word on my computer, now I go to whatever, Office 365, and my transaction with Microsoft is no longer at the point where I buy the box or install it on my software or download it from a website, but it is throughout my use, right? So the transaction is like prolonged. And they give me bundled services, so maybe I think that I'm speaking with one service, but behind it are 20 other services that have been integrated that are also seeing how I'm using the software. So the data is not only collected as I use the service, but it's also being disseminated to all the services that are in the bundle. And this gives rise to, on the one hand, agile service integration. So I'm not always talking with the same 20 services, but maybe they're being changed on demand because of pricing and what have you. And it also gives rise to data business models. So now I can maybe demand some money for data, right? At the same time, there's licensing and pricing models. I'm not just selling the software, but I'm making you pay as you use. That means that I need to know who is using my software. So if I'm using a service license from another company, I need to tell them how many of my users are using their service license. So I need to track every user on all of their devices to tell that company how many times I use their services. So it intensifies tracking. Is this clear? All right. So if we put that into Seda blocks, basically, in the past, we have shrink-wrap software production, and then we have the party with Bill Gates and everybody else, and then you have the purchase, and then you have the use, right? These are kind of three distinguishable time elements. What we have now is a service launches. As soon as you start using, your transaction starts, and it continues as long as you're using the service. Okay. Now let's look at the implications of the shift to agile development. So we said testing, 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 right? Like you need to do as many tests as possible. What that brings is that software engineers are doing user-centric development. This has its advantages. We now know what users need, and we don't have to like push down their throat software that they hate using. But it also means that what in software engineering is called quality requirements are a little bit down the line. Like most users are not going to tell you things about privacy and security, how it should be architected, et cetera. It also means that you can now do data-centric development because you can watch how each of the features that you're launching is used. You can use all of that data to decide whether you should continue producing that feature or if you should change it in a certain way, et cetera. The short iterations means that software engineering teams are now launching like maybe 5 to 20 features a week. So the service is constantly changing, right? And sometimes they're pulling down features, so they're not just producing new ones. And simplicity means that they're more likely to use other services or existing code, and they don't write their own. And this means that we're now in a space that not only, as long as you use, you're interacting with a bunch of services, but you're also interacting with a bunch of features, right? Things are going all over the place. So one of the implications of this is that there's no beginning and end. There's no more waterfall model, right? You can't say things like, let's think of privacy at the beginning. Where would the beginning be, right? So it really like requires us to rethink how software is made. So let's look into two of these elements of the changes. So I want to look at data-centric development and to the features, the rapid feature development, as kind of two things that have changed that are very relevant to privacy research. So the first one is that data becomes especially important for both the provisioning of services as well as the development teams. For provisioning of services, you want to know how much you can price your service at. And that means you want to know what your user churn is, right? So data becomes an integral part of service management. On the software engineering side, you can now see how each and every feature is being received. And you can also develop data products that you can, kind of like how we did search, right? You can kind of see how search is performing by doing lots of A/B testing. You can now do the same to see how you can improve other data products like recommender systems and ranking of all different kinds. And here, the industry is saying, do not rely on anecdotes. Use the metrics, right? And the metrics are basically about capturing how users are acting on the system and then basically optimizing them throughout their use, right? Optimizing features and optimizing the activities of the users. What's interesting here is that something like the way your cursor moves may become part of a metric, which means it becomes a fundamental part of software engineering. Right? So no longer is it just a marketing company that's interested in your cursor movements, but the software engineers want to know it too. What's also interesting is we're in the middle of this shift, and there are many metrics that are just in development, and that means that it's a place for intervention for privacy research. Okay, so that's one way to think about it. So with rapid feature development, I asked a lot of my interviews, like, why do you develop certain features? So where do features come from, and where do they go? And there was a lot of behavioral analytics again there. The product manager is kind of the key figure, but the boss can say so too, et cetera. But so the users are in there by proxy of the analytics, so they're not necessarily directly spoken to. And it can really impact their life. And what's interesting in relation to privacy here is that the introduction of a feature may not affect radically the information flows, in the sense of the sender and the recipient of the information may be the same. The sender is the user and the recipient is the company or the social network that maybe you're using. But something radically changes if a feature is introduced or removed. Think about like newsfeed, right? When newsfeed came, the transmission principle changed, but the sender and the recipient did not change. So how do we capture this with privacy, or should we even capture this with privacy? So basically what's happening is with every feature, the transaction costs of accessing information or doing certain activities using a certain service is being changed. And the question is, how does this relate to our ability to do things, act things, or autonomy? So not just access to information or what happens with our information, but also how we're able to act using this software. Removal of features is another thing. So if you're, for example, in the gig economy and you're using features to organize your work and a feature is removed, that may have a significant impact on you. So there's a lot that's going on with these features coming in and out, which is not easy to formulate in terms of privacy as information flows, but more maybe in terms of activities. Yes?
So for, how does these companies capture things like, we've introduced a new feature and there's a segment of our user base that said, oh, that feature violates my privacy. I am now stopping using your service at all. So now there's no more analytics.
Right.
They're just gone.
Right.
So how do they capture that and find out, oh, they left because they hated this feature or?
Right. Well, hopefully somebody wrote a blog post about it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think this don't talk with the user, don't talk, and just kind of figure things out from analytics, and don't trust anecdotes. Right, is kind of like such a elementary part. And I'm not saying this is everyone, this is an exploratory study, right? I think, and there are people who are saying this is not just about who leaves, but if you're constantly testing on users you already have, what kind of implications does it have for future users that might be from a different segment of the population, right? So I think there's a lot going on there, and yes, we can talk about that. So this means that privacy is no longer just about capturing, this is not just about capturing, this is not just having knowledge of people and what they like and things they'd like to do, but these systems, by virtue of the features that they're able to test, are actually capturing activities and are able to optimize them in the service of the company or the organization that they're working for. Right? So no longer are we just looking at knowledge and information flows, but we're looking at the impact of services and these features on activities. And so this, I think, raises a bunch of questions that I will not answer, but I think they're interesting, and they're revealed through looking at software engineering practices. Okay, we're almost at the end. So remember I said, what's the impact of this on privacy research? Here's a lovely study. So there's one person or 4 people who took the software engineering shift seriously. They said, okay, with this rapid feature development, and they looked at how Firefox went from 2004 to 2011. They were in the traditional modes of software engineering, and from 2011 on, they went into rapid development. They said, how does this affect security? Because if you're doing rapid feature development, you cannot apply good security frameworks. You cannot do threat modeling. You cannot do risk assessment and code maturity as a joke. So what does this mean? Do we have now more vulnerabilities and more attacks? And they studied the code, and they said, yes, there's more vulnerable density, and there's vulnerability density, and there's more immature code. But by virtue of things changing rapidly, they get to defy the attacker's learning curve. So they have a honeymoon with every vulnerability, and by virtue of rapidly developing new software, they're constantly extending the honeymoon. There's a second honeymoon and a third honeymoon, right? So this is a lovely piece of work, and the question is, can we ask similar questions for privacy, and where do we start? So the rest is really speculative, like, can we do data minimization when software engineering has become so data-centric? Or should we maybe minimize data-centric software? Like, what are the questions we should be asking? Can we work with mathematical guarantees when the services have so many moving parts? Can we avoid single point of failure when every service is actually 20 that is hidden behind a gateway? What does that mean? I'm really rushing now. All right, so data protection and compliance, one could say, on the one hand, there's great pressure on purpose, right? Like the purpose specification says, I will use your information to do X. But now, that thing is 20 or maybe 200 features in the lifetime of the use of that information. So what does it mean to have purpose specification? And at the same time, what I see the most kind of flourishing in this environment are automated policy technologies, right? Like, I have a new app, I have a new feature, so I need to change the policy, and I can plug it into a policy language, says I'm now using this data, does it violate, does it not, I can move on, right? So privacy becomes very procedural in the services world. We can talk about that later, but it's really unclear how you could increase transparency when the complexity has gone up so much. So there's lots of questions to be asked here about assumptions of service, A lot of control stuff here is about a single organization doing things. But what happens when it's 20 services doing something for you, just for one functionality, okay? And if you remember privacy as practice, we said it's about collective information practices. Services are great. It turns out, for example, users hate the new feature because it's like a huge privacy violation. I can unplug it. I'm done. So this is awesome, right? Like, I can actually revise things. So maybe this is great for these guys, right? Then we say, though, I want to improve the user's ability to negotiate privacy. But if I'm constantly optimizing the user activities based on A/B testing, what kind of agency, so what kind of power and independence does this user have when I'm constantly manipulating them and their environment to act in a certain way, right? So these are like very fundamental questions. Also, with respect to transparency of social impact, so it seems now that, yes, there will be discrimination or fairness issues within the database, but the database is part of a process in creating features. And the features themselves may lead to social sorting. So they may actually lead to certain users leaving, right? And so what does it mean to ask about discrimination or unfair systems rather than databases and machine learning? So how can we think about it in a kind of more longitudinal way? Those might be some interesting questions. I'm almost done. So where are we going with this? That was a lot of words. I hope I convinced you that privacy research can and should learn from how software is cooked right now, right? Like, how is a sausage made is very relevant for all the different privacy technologies that we want to throw at software engineers. Will they be able to develop this stuff? Will they be able to integrate it? Or does it go totally against the way they're supposed to be developing software? Like, how do we do these trade-offs? And when we started thinking about privacy engineering, we thought we need to be specific about the domain. Is it in health? Is it in education? Is it a small company? Is it a bigger company? Is it an app, et cetera? But what we're actually seeing is that for privacy to materialize, or privacy engineering to materialize, software engineering practices also matter. For future research, this was, as I said, exploratory. I would like to do some systemic empirical studies of this Agile Turn. So what I did in a rush at the end, so look at the paradigmatic principles of privacy research and see if they still hold, like, do privacy from the beginning, or data minimization, like, how do they fare in this new environment? And can we ask questions like the group from UPenn as to maybe new possibilities as well as limitations as a result of this shift? I really would like to study the expanding role of behavioral analytics and software engineering. So not to see it just as a marketing thing, but as a fundamental thing to production. And also think about the politics of new service metrics. So one of my informants said that while we have a lot of metrics for search, we don't have so many of them for services. So maybe this is a point to think about how we can influence them in a good way so that they don't maybe take very intrusive things as kind of elementary for metrics to evaluate the success of a service. And obviously, we need to investigate the policy implications. What does it mean to look at the politics of features and control over activities rather than just knowledge of people? And maybe there's some hope because data protection was developed during the time of mainframes, which is more similar to services than others. That's it. So references. And thank you.